I've been spending the past few days going around YouTube watching deconversion videos from various atheists, the story of their deconversion from some sort of religious faith, usually Christianity, to atheism. And I decided that I would add mine because I have the perhaps interesting distinction of having deconverted, reconverted, and deconverted again. When I first deconverted, I was very young. I was probably around 12 or 13, and what happened was I read a book. It was The Gifted Kid's Survival Guide, Book 2. I never quite found Book 1. I'm not sure how I found Book 2 either. But, it was a little book that taught smart kids a little bit about what it's like to be different and, how to deal with feeling singled out or feeling strange or feeling like you think about things that other people perhaps don't. And I found it to be a very useful little book, and I liked it very much. But at one point I was reading one of the appendices of this book, and there was a list of particular questions that teenagers tended to wrestle with as they got older, particularly gifted teenagers. And right there in the middle of this list was a question that I had never thought of before. It was 4 words. They were, "Is there a God?" I remember reading this and just being absolutely dumbstruck by the idea that this was some kind of question. I was raised Christian. We were not the most observant people in the world, but my mother was very pious, had very strong faith, and this would be, we would go to the church and we would do various things. I sometimes went to Sunday school, sometimes didn't, because I didn't like it very much. But, it was basically a thing we did, and a church full of adults, all of whom believed the same thing, and I really it had never occurred to me that I might have a reason to doubt these people around me. Because if you think about it, when you're a young child and you go to school, the teachers teach you quite a lot of different things that you may not necessarily be there to verify. I mean, in science class you may do experiments or you may observe things, but your teacher tells you that there used to be slavery. You don't sit there and go, okay, I need all of the evidence that this happened. You accept this as, something that you're being taught. Perhaps maybe when you get older you examine the things that your teachers teach, but generally you accept them. This person knows things about the past or things about the way the world works that I don't. And that was basically how I felt about church. I didn't quite know how it all worked, but it had never occurred to me to stop and wonder whether we were there for any reason at all. I was utterly stunned by this question, and my first thought was, I don't know. Is there a God? I don't know. And I felt very distressed by this and very betrayed by this, because if you think about it, if I don't know, and if other people happen also not to know, which, finding this in the book seemed to imply that people generally didn't know, because why would a whole bunch of teenagers be asking this question? Why would this be a common question that teenagers ask if it was just some strange thing where I personally happened not to understand the truth of the matter? So all of a sudden this showed up for me as some kind of live question, and I was very frightened and angry. And I went home and I said to my mother, I was reading this book and I came across a question in this book that I don't know how to answer. Can you help me? And my mother was like, I'll do my best. And I said I was reading this book and I came across the question, is there a God? And my mother just kind of I don't remember exactly the look on her face or anything, but I remember her saying something like, nobody can be completely certain, but we have faith, and I have faith because of personal experience I had when I was very young, and I know that you have had a few experiences as well, which was true. I had an experience at one point where I was taking communion, and I ate the little piece of bread. We were Methodist, not Catholic, so rather than having wafers, we had a small piece of bread that you tore off, and a little tiny vial of grape juice that we drank. And I had gone up there, and I had done this, and I had suddenly felt a very intense feeling of someone being present with me, and a very intense feeling of having felt loved. And so I thought, well, obviously, this is Jesus, and Jesus is reminding me that I'm loved, or being with me, or something like that. And I was very pleased, because it wasn't something that happened all the time. So I'd had that experience. Actually, when I got older, I had a couple more unexplained experiences like that could be explained as or interpreted as God's presence, or the presence of angels, or something like that. So I am someone who has had those kinds of quote-unquote spiritual experiences. So I don't think it's the case that atheists are all people who have never had that happen, because I've had that happen a couple of times. The difference is that I interpret it as something that was going on within me, or something that I wanted, or something that my inner self reminding me I was worthy of love, or something like that. Something that had to do with my own consciousness and my own perhaps desires at the time, rather than something external. But yes, I do think those things happen, and I actually think they're fairly common. So, my mother is explaining this to me in these terms, and I was very unsatisfied. I didn't feel like that was a good enough explanation to structure our lives in such a way that we would do particular things on Sunday, that we would, say grace before meals. We didn't do that every meal, but we did that any kind of important holiday or time that we were with family. We performed these rituals, and I felt like, gee, we spend so much time performing these rituals. If none of us really knows whether there's a God, and faith is the only thing that we have, how exactly does that explain or justify or put together this way of structuring our experiences? I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. I remember that in Sunday school at one point, my Sunday school teacher had tried to explain the concept of faith, and she basically said that people get into knots about the idea of faith when they really shouldn't, because faith is a very common thing that we all have. Any time that we lay us down to sleep, we have faith that we're going to wake up the next morning. We don't assume that when we lose consciousness, we'll never regain it. We get into a car, we assume that we are going to be fine. We put on our seatbelts, but we have faith that we are not going to crash, or that, if we do, our seatbelt will save us. If we did not have faith, as she put it, we would believe that we were going to die anytime we got into, I shouldn't say behind the wheel, we weren't old enough to drive, but anytime we get into the passenger seat or the back seat, we would be terrified of dying. We're not. So therefore we have faith, and faith in God is a very similar thing, and it's similarly uncomplicated. So, we don't need to worry about it. We don't need to fret over it and what it really means, because it's, again, a very common experience. I don't know how this affected the other people in my Sunday school class. I do know how it affected me. It made me terrified to go to sleep. I could not function because all of a sudden the only thing that was keeping my fear at bay was faith, and I did not know what faith was. That explanation did not help. It just, basically it said that previously I had gotten into some kind of complacency, or, had not thought about something, and now it was brought to my mind, so I was thinking about it. So I was extremely anxious. I've always been something of an anxious person, and this made things, far worse. And, I had actually gone to my mother after that experience at Sunday school, and my mother had been very mad. My mother had said, you don't do that to children, that's just frightening. Had I believe even perhaps chewed that Sunday school teacher out, if I remember correctly, for saying that, for explaining faith in that way, and for doing something that my mom agreed was just upsetting. And so now here I was asking the big question: is there a God? The question to end all questions. Why are we here? Why do we do this thing on Sundays? What's the point? And my mother was explaining in terms of faith and in terms of personal experiences, and we'd already established that we didn't know what faith was. So I was very unhappy, and I was very angry. I was basically, hey, look at all the time that we lose performing these rituals. Look at all the things that we say to one another, assuming that what we're doing makes sense. And, when there is no satisfactory answer, there is no knowledge that we have. And so, I was deeply troubled by all of this. And I decided, I don't remember where I found the word atheist, but, quite possibly a dictionary, because I loved looking through them. My particular giftedness has to do with languages. I've always loved words. I could read at a very, very young age. I was, a baby, basically, that people, clutched to their chests, and I could read words. I'm not quite sure, again, where that gift comes from, why I have it, but, I'm very fortunate to have it. So, so I decided, well, I must be an atheist because I don't know, or an agnostic. I'm not sure which word I came across first, but, and so that was pretty much how my life went. Really, the only other time that it really came up, other than, my mother grieving that I had lost faith and hoping I would recapture it, was I was around the age to be confirmed in my church. Again, we were Methodist rather than Catholic, so it was probably a little less formal than Catholic confirmation would be, but you took a particular class, and at the end of it, you made a particular sort of a vow, and they presented you, as I understand it, with a confirmation Bible, and, this sort of thing. And I can't remember whether I was in the class or whether I was just about to start the class. I think I was just about to start the class. And I went to the pastor, or the person who was heading that group of youth. I'm not quite sure, I don't remember exactly how it worked, but I took the person aside. I said, I have something very serious to tell you. I said, I realized that I don't know whether there's a God. I've thought about this, at great length, and I honestly don't know. And I feel like my understanding is that getting confirmed means dedicating yourself to the faith, and I don't believe I can dedicate myself to the faith if I don't know whether there's a God. I said, I don't have any beef with you or any anger with you or anything like that, but I feel like it would be dishonest of me to go through this program that I don't know is pointing at anything, and I would be lying to myself, lying to you. And given that I'm honestly not sure whether there is a God or not, if God is looking down upon me and, hoping to smile at my dedication to the faith, he will see a version of me that is lying if I do this. And, I feel bad because I like you, I like these people, but I don't feel that I can lie. And so please excuse me, but I have to leave. And I was terrified. I was very worried, even though my mother's church generally was full of very nice people. They were folks that we would call moderate Christians. They were not fundamentalists. There was no hellfire. I don't think any of us even believed in hell, or talked about it much or anything like that. It was mainly, God commands us all to be nice, and Jesus' sacrifice was God being nice to us, basically. So, these were nice, friendly people, but I was still very scared. Because I was breaking away from my community with them, basically, and I felt bad. And, I will never forget that this person had the honor to say to me, okay, if that's the way you feel, if you're wrestling with these doubts and you haven't come to a conclusion that satisfies you, I'm not going to ask you to stand here and make a vow that you don't feel in your heart. And, he said, well, I believe that there is a God, and I hope you come back, and I hope you realize that God is there for you, and all this stuff, but I'm not going to force the issue. And, you're right, forcing the issue would be morally wrong. So I'm not going to, try to convince you to do something morally wrong. I'm going to ask you to, think about it, and hopefully, I hope to see you back in 3 or 4 years when you've sorted this out for yourself. And I said, thank you. I was very impressed. I was, I've always liked the folks at my mother's church. Aside from the issue of the faith thing, I was very weirded out by that, but I liked the people. I thought they were generally respectful of others, and that experience was no exception. So, I went about my life after that. I was an atheist. I got mad at my mom sometimes when she would say, I hope you find God. I would, come at her with, here are these contradictions and here are these things. As I got to be an older teen, I looked into some of that stuff, and I was very shocked by all the contradictions, and again, kind of mad. Why does this structure of organized religion exist if there are so many obvious contradictions and nobody can quite tell you what faith is, and you get these unsatisfactory explanations like that Sunday school teacher gave me. Why are we doing all this? What is this? Basically, it seemed like a house of cards, and it seemed like a bunch of good people were structuring their lives around something that would easily fall. So, I was kind of an angry atheist. I don't know whether I would quite say I was Christopher Hitchens, but, I was mad. And I was upset. When I thought about it. And I got to college later, and I actually had some psychological problems. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from various things that happened to me. Some things that happened to me when I was a child, and some things that happened to me when I was an older teen. My problems were not correctly diagnosed at the time. I was diagnosed with situational depression when the stuff happened when I was an older teenager, but even though I kept going for mental health help, people for some reason were very reticent to actually diagnose me with post-traumatic stress disorder. So what would happen is my theoretically situational depression would seem to clear up, and I would be, have a clean bill of mental health, and I would go about my life, and then something else would happen and I would get very upset. I would have flashback. I would say they were flashbacks, but at the time I thought flashbacks were only really hallucinatory. I am back there right now, and I never quite had those experiences. I just had strong reminders, what one would call triggering experiences, now that I know the lingo and now that I know what's going on. But, so basically I would break, and then I would get fixed, and then I would break again, basically. So I kept going for mental health help over and over anytime that I became distressed anew. And, I realized there was a continuity to all this, but other folks really didn't seem to. Apparently I seemed to function well. I'm not quite sure what that was, but, so that was what happened. So I got to college, and you can probably guess that I was very distressed, and I had one of my experiences where I would say that I broke again. I had persistent suicidal ideation. I hid in my room. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea how to function in the new environment, and class was, I guess, okay because it was like school, and school was something I remembered and something I'd done well at. But the moment I got home, the moment I had to handle getting my own lunch, the moment I had to handle trying to make friends, I didn't know what was going on, and I was very, very deeply depressed and distressed. And so one of the things that my mother had said many times, and again, I don't blame her for this, she is a very strongly theistic person who is very religiously devout and sees things in religious terms. She noticed my deep distress and my inability to handle it, and she said, well, what you need to do is you need to find God. And, like I said, I had been fairly mad when I got older, so I responded to these things with anger, deep anger. No, I don't. There is no God, the hell with you, you're spouting nonsense. But I really had no idea how to find contentment, how to find peace. I knew that if I went to a shrink again, they would tell me I was a little depressed. I would go through this a few months of treatment, and then they would tell me I was fine, and then I would not be fine again. I knew this because, empirical evidence. I had experienced this over and over. So I decided, what if my mother knows something that I don't? I have no idea how this is going to work because I don't know whether there's a God or not, but I suppose that leaves open the answer yes. So, I went to one of these, like an open house for freshmen, find out about all the different clubs on campus, different groups, and there was a church group there. And they were, I would say, fairly fundamentalist. And I went and I talked to them, and I said, I'm feeling lost. I have not tried this. And, I'm really not sure about God, even about whether there is one, but I'm open to the possibility of seeing whether this is, there's a God-shaped hole in me, as one of the songs says, and, whether my feeling that I didn't know was a misunderstanding, whether I didn't understand faith properly. And so I joined this fundamentalist church. I had the belief at the time that I was arrogant, that I was too prideful, that I was the kind of person who, anytime someone said something that I didn't accept or had authority over me, that I wasn't sure they deserved. I was a very prove it kind of person. And I thought that perhaps part of my problem was that I couldn't just take things as they come. And, you know, religious people seem to have a peace about that sort of stuff, and I wanted to share in that. So, you know, I met with this gentleman, and this gentleman was extremely kind seeming, and even now that I believe that what he was doing was creepy, I am still torn between a part of me that thinks that he was honestly doing what he thought was right, and a part of me that thinks that, you know, what happened after that was quite creepy. So, you know, I'm not quite sure where to put him in the narrative, you know, whether to give him the Snidely Whiplash mustache in my memories or not. But, you know, I met with him, and he said, you know, that he was honored that I wanted to understand this stuff, and that, you know, seemed like I was honestly seeking God, which meant that, you know, God would listen and show himself to me. And you know, so I got involved in their church, and I felt a little bit like a secret agent, because I said that I had been an atheist. I didn't say I still might be an atheist. I said, you know, I'm struggling with doubt, but I presented myself as pretty sure that they would convince me. Where deep inside, I was much more... I was driven by emotions. I felt that if I could subject myself, if I could fully let go of my overweening ego, then something would happen and I would be happy. I believed that. But as far as whether there was a God, like, I still honestly didn't know. And so I kind of presented myself as an ex-atheist when really I was testing a hypothesis in a way. And I felt a little bit, again, kind of like a liar, kind of like, you know, well, not only am I this arrogant jerk who needs to learn how to kneel properly to something greater than herself, but I'm also kind of a dickhead, because I'm, you know, saying that I agree with them, that I believe as they do, when I honestly don't. And, you know, so that further kind of gave me that sense of myself as, I guess, what they would have called a sinner. You know, there's something wrong with me. I'm lying. I'm misrepresenting myself. I'm doubting these people who've given me a place among them. You know, so it fed into my negative self-image, my suicidal, actually, self-image. And I remember two things that I can say to you that I remember very vividly. We were doing a project at one point. We were doing like a role play, and it was a role play about evangelizing, as I recall it. It was, you know, one of us was going up to someone and trying to share the good news with them, and the other person was role playing a person who didn't want to hear it. And I felt very uncomfortable role-playing the person doing the evangelizing, and I said, you know, hey, I used to be an atheist. Why don't I be the person who says, you know, the heck with you, you know, because I knew how to play that person, because I'd been that person, and I, you know, part of me recoiled at the idea of trying to push my beliefs on someone. So I remember, you know, this person coming up to me and role-playing, telling me this stuff, and I was, you know, I don't want to hear it, I've got no use for what you have to say. And I remember it vividly because it was actually how I deeply felt, you know, not how I was pretending to feel, not how I wanted to feel, but how I really felt. And I let out all of this rage. I remember my performance being extremely emotional, because it was, and I think the reason why is because it was the reality. It was what I really thought. It was what I really felt, about this situation. And I remember the other person being a little stunned, I think, and I think we worked it out well. We worked it out as, I played the role properly of, the person who wanted to know more about God by the time this exchange ended. I remember people being utterly stunned that I was a former atheist. They did not actually, this was something that I found very surprising. They actually said things like, I never would have thought that somebody who had been an atheist would bother to give us the time of day. We were all raised religious. So I was, in a funny way, I was a little bit of a celebrity with some of them. Well, I shouldn't say celebrity, because I don't think they didn't really give me acclaim or something, but, I remember 3 or 4 of them just thinking, God, our God is an awesome God. What are you doing sitting here? God must have changed your heart. That's amazing. And I remember, again, feeling like a charlatan, feeling like a liar, because I was trying to believe it, but when I examined my heart, I didn't believe it. I still didn't. And, I felt like perhaps I still didn't, because perhaps I was still arrogant. I didn't like praying at night. I didn't like the idea of kneeling to a greater power than myself. I was very uncomfortable with this. I felt like I was making a slave of myself. And, I didn't even, again, I wasn't even sure that the master existed. But, again, I had this feeling that I had to get rid of my arrogance, that my mental ill health came from this arrogance, and that once I learned to find pleasure in, or find contentment in kneeling to something greater than myself, I would be happy. And I basically was rapidly coming to the conclusion that I would never be happy, because I'm not submissive. I don't have that. That's not part of my psychological makeup. I will defer to people who know more than me about something, or people who have more expertise than me, or people that are wiser than me on a particular issue. But with God, unless you're the sort of person who feels God's presence and who has those unexplained experiences often enough that you really think someone is walking with you all the time, which I didn't. It was, I wasn't prostrating myself before someone who had shown me that they were better than I was. I was just prostrating to prostrate. And I could not make that make sense. I could not make that work. And I put the blame on myself and felt horrible. Constantly horrible, and I felt bad about other things. For example, the church, I came to find out that the church was anti-gay, and I shouldn't have been surprised at this, but, it was. And my best friend was someone who was gay, so I was having this very normal collegiate life where I was doing all of the normal college things, and then on Sunday and a couple other days I was going off with this church, and I wasn't even telling people about it because it was so discontinuous with the rest of my life. I was joking with my friends about sex and about different things that they wouldn't have accepted, like sex with other women, or sex in particular ways that they probably, I would have thought, would have found eyebrow raising, and all this stuff. And then I had this second life where I was this ex-atheist who was doing all this stuff, and it was very rapidly unraveling. But again, I kind of blamed myself for the unraveling. And then a couple things happened to me that deconverted me for good. Well, the first thing was I never had any more of those experiences of being with God, like that experience I'd had at communion, like another experience I'd had when I was recovering from surgery. I had the experience of being visited by what one might call an angel. I woke up in the middle of the night, sitting in my hospital bed, and someone was there with me telling me it would be all right. And this person was glowing purple and was talking to me, and I remember feeling very content in the presence of this being. And then the being left, and I immediately rang the nurse's bell and said, how did that person get in? Because, some part of me understood that rationally this couldn't have made sense. And of course the nurse was telling me I was hallucinating and all this stuff, and I was resisting because, I liked the message I'd been given, and so even though I'd had those two experiences at various points in my life, I never had any more of them once I'd found these religious people. And that was one thing. But the big thing were two things that had happened. One was I met with the pastor, the gentleman who had converted me, and I asked him about sin, and I asked him about the flood, because I was very uncomfortable with the idea of sin, with the idea that we were broken and we needed salvation. I mean, I felt that I was broken, but the idea that all of humanity was broken when people didn't seem to be as depressed as I was, and people seemed to be more comfortable kneeling than I was. I mean, after all, I was amid them all the time, so I thought, these people don't have my problem, so how can they all be broken? How can they all be sinners? And I remember him taking a plant and snapping off a leaf from a plant that was sitting there, and talking about how sin made us wither, and like the leaf of the plant would turn brown and die, and that was what sin had done to us. And I remember he seemed to think that this was a very good explanation, and I didn't. I didn't think it made any sense at all. I didn't think it made any sense that there was something wrong with my gay best friend, even though, they said, well, we should be nice to these people who, they're sinning, but we shouldn't hate them. I approved of that, but that wasn't acceptable to me. And here was this explanation of sin that just had to do with a plant breaking, and I was like, that seems poetic, but how does that explain to me what's wrong with us? And so then the next thing that happened was the thing that really and truly deconverted me for good. He said, you need to understand sin. I want to show you something. And he said, I'm going to show you this movie. And this movie is going to explain, because one of the things I was asking was about the flood. I said, why in the world was that necessary? What could possibly have been so wrong with these people that God would do that? I just had a fundamental reaction of revulsion to that story. And I was, how do we explain this? What does this mean? What is this? What is this? And he said, I'm going to show you something, and it's going to explain to you both sin and the flood. And once you see it, you will understand. And what he said that I needed to come to understand is that the people, the Bible says, those people were fundamentally wicked. And so, God had to destroy them because they were simply that wicked. And I couldn't believe this. And he said, let me show you something. So he brought me, I was in the church, and I was upstairs. There was like an upstairs place where we had our Bible study and our meetings. And he said, okay, sit here and I will put this video on. And I sat there alone, and he put on a movie, and it was a movie with Macaulay Culkin in it. It was called The Good Son, and this movie is a psycho thriller, basically, and it is about this young child who goes to live with his relatives, and his cousin is a psychopath, basically. Finds people getting hurt funny, does all of these things to harm other people. Spoiler alert, you come to find out that he killed his sister because he wanted her rubber ducky or something. You know, so strange things like that, you know, just absolutely awful. And, you know, you saw this kid do these horrible things, and when the good kid, the protagonist, tried to expose him, he threatened to poison all the food. So you have the good kid going down in the middle of the night, and he's throwing out everything that's in the refrigerator. He's frantically putting it down the disposal, and you know, you've got this foreboding music, and these, you know, his eyes are wide, and you know, it was terrifying. And you know, and he's frantically throwing away this food because nobody will believe that there's poison in it, and he has to throw all of it out because he doesn't know which thing might be poisoned, and he's trying to save everyone. And you know, and it was just horrifying. And I was there alone. I was sitting there in complete silence for, you know, 2 hours or however long this ran, with this thing that was just absolutely terrifying me. It was horrible. I don't even know how to describe it. It was sickening. It was fundamentally sickening. And, you know, the ending of the story, again, spoiler alert, is that the mother has to save the kids. They're on some kind of a cliff or a ledge, and she's trying to hold on to both of them, and she has to let one of them drop. And so at the very end, she trusts the good kid and lets her son drop. And, you know, of course this is very sad, and she doesn't want to, and, you know, but she realizes that he's rotten to the core, and she has to let him drop. And so I don't remember whether it was the middle of the movie or after the movie, but I remember somebody coming in with McDonald's while I was watching this, and I remember me just frantically, I don't even remember eating it, I just remember looking at it and fixing my attention on it, because McDonald's was real, and this story that was just absolutely making me sick mentally, just almost driving me mad, was not real. And so I was just absolutely focusing on this McDonald's, just the McDonald's, the McDonald's, the McDonald's, to try and bring myself back to reality. And, you know, I remember the pastor coming back and the people from the church coming back, and I remember their explanation being, you know, this is why the flood had to happen. This bad kid that did these horrible things was a sinner, was you know, what the world was like before the flood. And that was, and God was like the mother. She didn't want to let her son go, but she had to. The flood had to happen. And I just remember this explanation just washing over my head, like I couldn't even listen to it, because I was just so absolutely horrified and absolutely stunned that this had that this experience had happened to me, that this guy was okay with leaving me alone with this thing that would terrify me. And I realized when I got up to leave, and I was so shaken and I was so sick in my soul. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say soul, being an atheist, but whatever it was, my spirit, my consciousness, my brain, whatever you want to call it, feeling so sick. And I just realized that was brainwashing. That was brainwashing. That was brainwashing. That was what that person was doing, was shaking me up so bad that I would accept anything. And that I was so sickened because that was what that person had been doing to me. And, in that moment, I was certain that I wanted absolutely no part of this, because that was not about showing me something. That was about toying with my mind. Toying with my mind until I believed this. And I wanted no part of that. And again, I said at the beginning, I'm not sure whether to give this guy a snidely whiplash mustache. He did very kind things for me. When I ended up having to go to the hospital, when I ended up, there was a scare about whether I would need another surgery, he was right there by my side. It could be that he didn't really mean that and he was just trying to keep me in his flock. I don't think so. I think that was human decency in that person. I think it was. I think it was honor. I think it was hope. I think it was love. I think it was wanting nothing more than to be there for me. I think it was the human decency in that man. But the system that he was a part of led him to do those other things, which were absolutely the opposite, absolutely the antithesis of human decency. And when I realized what that was, when I realized what had happened, I walked away. I said, no. I'm an atheist. I always have been. I was trying on another form of life, and I couldn't let go of it because I was stuck. I have to stop. I have to not do this anymore. And so that was my second and, my last deconversion. I've flirted since with studying religion, with wondering about, perhaps there is something in us that draws us to these experiences of the transcendent, to these experiences that we call spiritual. In some ways, I'm still open to that, to the idea that we seek these experiences, we have these experiences every once in a while. We do, sometimes an angel does seem to visit us, or we do feel something during communion, or perhaps during sex, or perhaps during a walk through the mountains. We have these experiences of great awe, but I no longer believe that they point to something outside of us. I no longer believe that they have to point to something outside of us. I no longer believe that prostrating ourselves, that forcing ourselves onto our knees makes for happiness. What was wrong with me was that I needed mental health help. I needed support. I needed understanding that my mental health issue was and is chronic. That's what I needed. I did not need to humble myself. I did not need to trust in God. I needed to find the help and support that I was not getting. And I needed to seek them and demand them on my terms, not on the terms of someone who would terrify me in order that I would believe as he believed. And I'm not someone who believes that all theists are bad people. I'm not someone who believes that all religious people are poisoned, but I am someone who believes that the way that religion propagates itself can be horrifying. The way that people try to get you to see yourself, to see other people as sinners, as overly prideful when they respect themselves, quote unquote, too much. That stuff I do think is poisonous. And I do think that offering that stuff as an answer to a question that none of us can quite answer for absolute certain makes no sense unless you see it as something that has to do with power, with control. That, you know, if religion really doesn't have a tendency to lead people to doing that, why do we see that so much? Why? Not everyone is fundamentalist. I agree, I understand. But why do they keep showing up? Why do they keep popping up? And the only reason that I can find for that, to answer that, is that because it's easy. It's easy when you're talking about something you can't see, when you're talking about experiences where nobody has quite the same ones. You know, a lot of us have those experiences, but why did my angel have purple veins and my communion experience was Jesus when that person over there saw an angel with white wings and communed with Vishnu, or whatever the case may be. You know, because these things are all personal, because these things are not verifiable in the way that science verifies things, in the way that empirical investigation verifies things, anyone can make them mean anything they want. And I think that freedom is experiences that mean what you say they mean, what you say they are. You know, what is your honest experience of the world? What is your honest investigation of the world? If people didn't fear that, people wouldn't need to use these strategies to try and force you to see what they think as true. And that, more than anything, is why I am strong in my lack of faith today, because I don't know. And because I think that anyone who tells you that I don't know is an unacceptable answer to a question is somebody who is trying to get you to see things as they see them. And if they're doing that by presenting proof to you, by presenting evidence to you, then they think that your knowledge is incomplete. If they're doing that by offering you a conception of faith, if they're doing that by using stories that scare you, or stories that deem you unworthy, stories that say that you need saving, then they have some kind of an agenda. And that is why, even though quite a lot of people that I deeply care about and deeply respect and love are theists, I can't agree with them. Because I can't put it together in my mind that people that are so decent would accept that. That doesn't make sense. And that's why my first deconversion was, what's going on? My second deconversion was, let me examine this from the inside and see what it is. And what I saw when I examined it from the inside was ugly. And that's what made me walk away. I don't think all religion is ugly. I don't think all religious people mean something ugly. But the core of what they're doing is something I just can't agree with. I can't see people as sinners. I can't. I can see people as imperfect. I can see people as sometimes dishonest. I can see people as sometimes deeply hurtful. I can't see them as sinners, because seeing yourself as a sinner is the first step to letting this stuff into your mind. And I almost let it into mine because I conceived of myself that way. And I don't think anyone should conceive of themselves that way, and I don't think we should tell our children to conceive of ourselves that way. And that is why I believe as I do. I think the world is quite beautiful. I think other people are quite beautiful a lot of the time. And I think we can see that beauty and honor that beauty without presupposing that there's some greater beauty that we could never even approach. I think there's quite a lot to exalt in ourselves and in the world around us, and I think that honestly we're better off if we do that.